All right, councillors, as the time has gone 7 p.m, I welcome you to tonight's special council meeting and open the meeting at 7:02. I'd like to welcome elected members, staff in the gallery. I just want to read out a couple of things. Obviously, this is a new way of doing meetings at this point in time. So I have to note that we've got Councillor Gossink is joining the meeting via Zoom and will partake in the meeting and have voting rights for agenda item 3.1 in accordance with section 92 of the Local Government Act 1999, as per the Electronic Participation in Council Meetings Notice, number 1, 2020. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that due to the ongoing public health emergency, COVID-19, the Minister for Transport, Infrastructure and Local Government, Minister Knoll, issued the Electronic Participation in Council Meetings Notice, number 1, 2020, pursuant to section 302B of the Local Government Act 1999, notice number 1, varying or suspending the operation of the specified provisions of the Local Government Act 1999 as set out in the Schedule 1 to notice number 1, which commenced operation on the 31st of March 2020. In order for Council to adhere to these new requirements, item number 3.1 of the agenda, so the agenda in front of you, outlines and seeks approval for the relevant implementation of the required amendments. This will be the first item of the agenda, and I need to ask the CEO talk to us about that, as he'd like to provide a further update and recommendation prior to moving and seconding the motion that you find inside the paper, as he has recommended amendments to the original council recommendation, which is in the notice paper. I'll do apologies now. So apologies. We also have Councillor Coppins, who's an apology, and I believe Councillor Rentoulis is on his way to the meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? If there are none, then I hand over to Mr. Green for item 3.1, proposed amendments to Codes of Practice and Informal Gathering Policy, page 5. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I'm just going to put up on the screen in a minute a proposed amendment to what I recommended to the council via the agenda, and I'll just speak to that very quickly. Yep, thank you, Sky. We've taken some advice since we had the agenda sent out that would suggest that a previous motion, previous resolution of the council around not participating in live streaming at that particular point in time is at odds with what our Code of Practice now requires us to contemplate. So what I'm putting forward to you, and the Local Government Act enables me to do this, is a recommendation that you revoke the previous resolution of the council. My suggestion is that we revoke it just for the period that we're dealing with COVID-19, and that we would revisit our participation or otherwise in live streaming later on. The advice we've got is that would be the appropriate thing to do from a governance perspective, so that we don't have conflicting resolutions in place around live streaming of council meetings. That's the first part. The second part is a minor amendment to the actual Code of Practice itself, where we've just simplified the bit around public access to meetings, which was perhaps a little bit more complicated than it needed to be initially, and just recognising that the public will be permitted to attend meetings. We're just not being specific about how that might be, because it might be in an open meeting like we have this evening, or alternatively it might be done online. So we've just simplified that, or recommending that you simplified that in the Code of Practice as well. So they're the things that that's the staff recommendation. It's now over to you to consider that. Thank you.
Draft of the revoke. So does somebody wish to move the staff recommendation? Councillor Baker, do you wish to speak? Seconded by Councillor Marsh. Councillor Marsh, do you wish to speak? So councillors, this is incorporating what the CEO just advised us in relation to the revocation, and then the change in relation to how the public simplifies the way in which the public will be able to potentially see the meeting if they wish to do so. Does anyone wish to speak against the motion? Does any other councillor wish to make comment or question on the motion? If not, then we'll, as there's no other speakers, I won't give Councillor Baker the right to close as no one spoke. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? I declare that carried. We then go to item 4, informal discussion COVID-19 update on page 114. And I'll hand over to Mr. Green and Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wait for to come up. Thank you. Okay, so whoa. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bit of an update as and just quite generally around where COVID and where we're at with things from a high level, but mainly in how they've been impacting Playford from a services and an organisational perspective up until now. So just a bit of summary and stuff that you may have already seen. So I thought I'd just give you a bit of broader context from an economic point of view. What we're actually seeing right now is not just a health crisis, but it's also an economic crisis. And that's definitely been a part of the messaging from the federal government when they have been making their announcements. You're seeing the Reserve Bank lower interest rates even further, which, you know, we're extremely grateful for. The purpose they do that is the fact that it's meant to inspire consumer spending, because that's what we need to keep the economy going. The messaging from a broader economic point of view is basically, you know, those non-essential services are feeling the majority of the effect of this, you know, with tourism, hospitality, etc. And what we see from a broader public sector perspective is that an increase in activity rather than winding down like those other sectors, because we need to fill that need to support society through the crisis. So by that definition, I think we kind of fit into what is an essential service in that respect. So you've seen lots of stimulus packages come out from the government, which I'll cover in a second. And basically what the role of government is in an economic crisis is to try and encourage spending, speed up infrastructure, and try and push the way through the crisis. So that's pretty much our role at this point in time. There could be some impacts on our residential construction nationally. We're talking about a sort of a low point in approvals going through, but this COVID environment could slow those even more or lead them to a bit more of a halt, but that is something we're always looking at. And basically what the outlook is right now is they're not expecting any improvements in this calendar year. So 2020, probably not any improvements, significant improvements that we can talk about. Growth pretty much hit a wall at this point in time. And but I guess as sharp as the decline has been, that's how quickly the recovery will happen as well. So that's kind of where the economic forecast is sitting at the moment. So that's really kind of a real broad perspective on what's happening at that level and how some of that will affect us. So as I said, there's lots of stimulus stuff happening around the moment. You'll see the things that are being released by both federal and state governments, and some of those impact us and some of them don't. So the JobKeeper, JobSeeker kind of type payments that are out now for that $1,500 a fortnight, we do not qualify for that. There's probably two aspects for that. The fact that we're not a business in the eyes of the taxation and the government, like we're government. So there's that one aspect, and the second aspect as well is that it is also based on a 30% loss in revenue, and we couldn't justify a 30% loss in revenue at this point. So we wouldn't qualify for any of those there for any of our staff, be it casuals or part-time or full-time. The other benefit, the other stimulus packages that have been released are around, you know, cash flow support for small to medium businesses. So based on BAS returns, businesses can actually seek just lump sum cash flow funding from the government at the moment, ranging between sort of $10,000 to $25,000 a quarter. So, you know, that's something that small to medium businesses can access now. Again, they've got to go through a process to do that. Same with instant asset write-offs. This is a bit of a go-to for them. They just allow, again, to encourage spending of businesses, that they will still invest in their business, and they give them immediate tax write-offs for that. There's investment incentives there, which are related to banks and businesses looking to invest. So the banks are kind of relaxing on their guidelines with regards to investment from a financing perspective. supporting for apprentices and traineeships to try and keep those people in the jobs. There's obviously the household payment, the $750 payment that's going out to anyone registered through Centrelink. There's temporary superannuation relief in place as well, so it's a little bit easier to access your superannuation at the moment if you need it, and you can obviously go through the tests to prove that you need it. There's a moratorium on rent, which basically means you can't evict, if you're a landlord, you can't evict anyone out of their house in the next 6 months. You have to keep them in there whether they can pay the rent or not. And then obviously for us, the main one for us really is around the increase in grant funding for what we can access, which we went through with you a couple of weeks ago with regards to how they're increasing People for Places grant and one other program that I can't remember at this point in time. And basically we they've doubled the buckets of money that were allocated to those grant programs, and we've put in submissions into those. So with the latest one only being submitted today. So those are the only real one, the big one that's really impacting us is really those grant packages that have actually been doubled, where we can look at what we've already got planned in our 4-year delivery plan and see what would qualify for those stimulus packages, and we're trying to, get the funding and leverage that funding to be able to do that work. So that's a bit of what's happening in the stimulus stuff. What does it mean for us quite locally from a City of Playford perspective? For us, the philosophy from definitely from the executive and the broader leadership team has been around keeping the safety of our staff and community first and foremost. That is what has driven all of our decision making up until now. We've obviously implemented safe social distancing at all of our sites and adopted really high-level good hygiene practices in all front-facing areas and our office environments as well. So that's kind of a bit of the anecdotal stuff that we get through. From a services perspective, our essential services are still being delivered to the community because, as I said, this is the time in need that we actually need to be able to support the community and not shut our services down when they need it. What we've used as a bit of a principle there is we are willing to offer services that the community feels safe to access, that we feel safe to deliver as putting our staff on that front line, and it hasn't been banned by the state government or the federal government. So that's kind of basically the criteria that we've used to be able to keep a sustainable service delivery in place. So we're constantly reviewing that in regards to community demand and assessing whether the demand is still there, and do we still need to be operating in this service? Can we still deliver it safely? Does the community feel safe to access it? So we're constantly reviewing that as we go, and all the senior managers are playing their part in the various services for that from that perspective. So why don't we shut down, and why don't we sort of stand everything down? Going back to, as I said, that first point, this is a time where our community needs us the most. So if we shut down, we are closing the doors to our community. So our services look slightly different. We may not be operating a Grenville Centre, but we are running welfare check calls with all of our Grenville patrons and any of our community centre patrons as well. We're spending like 20 minutes per phone call with each of those people on the phone, making sure that their mental health is well, their physical health is well. We are supporting them in every possible way we can. Do a meal delivery service, anything that we can think of to still get our service out to the community to make sure that the community's needs are being met, despite the fact that they can't come into our sites and actually visit and, socialise. We still hold the responsibility there to be able to make sure that we are still keeping their welfare at first and foremost. And so that's why we're kind of steering away from shutdown and stand down as much as we possibly can to make sure we can continue our services. Organisationally, what that's meant for us as well is that we've implemented a bit of a tiered approach around workforce management. Obviously, one of the key things that we've had to facilitate organisationally is a rather large work from home contingent. So we've got 199 people as of today, I think it was, working from home. We still have just over a couple of hundred people working from site. And when I mean working from site, I mean like that includes the verge mowers and the tree pruners and all of that. So they're not literally on our site, but they're still working front facing, etc. And we have 34 people at the moment sort of self-isolating, not because they're suspected or because they're positive, but because they need to isolate in their sense that they are at a risk category perspective. And thankfully, we have nil suspected or positive cases at this point in time, which is also a great thing. So we are always working where possible to make sure that we can continue our services sustainably and we can make sure that our staff are meaningfully employed. And we use that word on purpose because we need them to be in a job. Every job is essential, if I'm quoting ScoMo at the moment. Every job is essential. We need to be keeping these people in a job as well. Again, that has a circular impact in terms of stimulating economy with people earning income. So what we're trying to do is make sure that they're meaningfully employed. We don't want to keep them in a job that is not providing a return to the community. We most certainly want to make sure that that keeps happening. So we are looking at new ways of doing things. We are trying different things, altering our services wherever we can, and we're constantly looking at that before we have to try and get to the place where we actually would think about turning things off. So we want to stay in this holding pattern for a long time, and we think that that's actually quite sustainable. If we can get through the 6 months that everyone's talking about in that phase, that would be fantastic. That's what we're aiming for. What we've also done as well with regards to some of the sites and the front-facing teams that are still around the organisation, like we've tried to enhance their social distancing. So we've created 2 depots at the depot now. So you now have Depot A and Depot B, 2 different site huts, and trying to enhance the social distancing there between the teams. Again, in the event that we might have a positive case there, then at least we've only got one team exposed, half the staff in those teams instead of the entire team. We're running shifts where we can as well, like mechanics, carpenters, maintenance guys. They're all doing sort of like a 5 till 7 sort of split shift sort of thing, where we're actually having a break between the two, wiping down workshops, getting the next shift back in as well. So we're kind of taking literally every precaution we can possibly take to make sure our staff are kept safe, and particularly those that are going out to the community as well. So we're doing our bit to stop the spread. And we are also really clearly focused on the fact this is not just about physical distancing. There is the mental aspect of this in terms of social distancing and the impact this has on mental health and mental well-being of both our community and our staff. So we are not losing focus on that and making sure that, as I said, the welfare checks are happening for our community to make sure that we are actually keeping an eye on the health and well-being of our community. And likewise, we've replicated that thinking internally as well, because while working from home might sound really exciting, after 3 or 4, 5, 6 months, it might be quite a different story. So we're making sure we're trying to keep everyone connected to the work and connected to the organisation. So I think I've spoken to you before about the continuity management team. We established this early on. Feels like a lifetime ago, but it's actually probably only been about 3 or 4 weeks. Basically, the purpose of this CMT now is really to just react to the changing environment and make any decisions with CEO approval, of course, to address any services that may be impacted or any impacts to our organisation. So that's really just responding to the things that are potentially coming through from state and federal government. So we are just that response and react team. We're not sort of taking over the whole decisions of the organisation at the moment. We still have an amazing leadership team who are able to still make decisions around their services and what activities we're employing in those service deliveries at the moment. But we just still have the form and the function of the CMT there to be ready to react and respond in the event of something changing externally. So that's really what the purpose of the CMT is about now. And no doubt in a situation like this comes more reporting that we also have to do, which through the Local Government Association, they've established the Local Government Functional Support Group, which is traditionally the trigger that they use for IMT, like for emergency management. So we have Derek, who's sitting on as a member of that functional support group as well. And basically through that group, they've asked us to continually, so we're reporting to them every 2 days on any changes to our services, any changes to our organisation, the number of people that we've got isolating, number of people working from home. So there's a nice little level of reporting that we've got to do there as well. And this is about then getting that, contributing to that sector view. So what we also work with when we're talking about some of these changes that are happening in COVID is we're not the only council obviously going through this. So we try to take the sector view as much as we can and where we think it was relevant for Playford. We don't take the blanket approach. We still try and go, well, what is the right decision for Playford here? Which may not be the same thing that other councils are doing, or it may not be necessarily, there may not be a sector position on it. So we're trying to keep our decision making quite risk-based and service-based. So that way we're making the right decisions for our community. So as I said, the local government support group has been established. Derek's sitting on that space. We also have Andrew Nesbitt sitting as a liaison officer for the public health function within this operational group as well. So Andrew's role is to take care of, be the liaison officer for 10 surrounding councils in this northern area. So there's some great things that come out of things like that in the fact that, 2 of our staff are recognised to be able to be great contributors and play a role in this from a sector-wide perspective. So, and that helps us too because, we get the benefits of that as well. What has come out of some of that local government functional support group is direct consultation with SAPOL. So having a conference with the Deputy Commissioner the other day to talk to them about what their expectations of local government are right now. And what they've done is they've asked us to complete 2 tasks, to assist them with 2 tasks. And the first one is welfare calls. So, which, as I said, we're already doing. We do that for our community, but they've kind of extended that to say it'd be great if you could do that across communities for people who are infected, and be able to help them to be checking in on the mental health of all of those cases that actually have been identified around the state, as well as those people living in our community. So that's one task. And the second task is they've asked us to assist with the compliance efforts using an observe and report function. So we're not enforcing, we're not penalising, but we are taking on an observe and report function to assist SAPOL to do what they need to do in terms of enforcement. So we're not taking on those responsibilities, but again, they've asked us to observe and report. So we, can literally have staff driving around the city and checking that social distancing is being adhered to. And we now have an obligation to report that to SAPOL, and they will directly investigate that, which I think is a much more targeted approach. What they're trying to do there is a much more targeted approach as opposed to just blanket policing, which may be happening in other countries at the moment. And you just kind of have, policing happening everywhere. But this is SAPOL's version of a much more targeted approach to kind of work out who they need to be getting into. So our function is clear around the fact that it's just observe and report. So we don't necessarily have to have qualified people, I guess, in that respect. They just, they don't have to be a licensed, like an EHO or anything like that. They can actually, be someone who can't do mowing at the moment, and they're just going out and having a look and checking on the compliance with the social gathering guidelines. So those things have been tasked to us. So this is obviously stuff that we would never have done before. But as I said, from an essential service provision from a local government, this is, now part of our responsibilities. This is new things that we are now picking up and giving that meaningful work to some of our staff as well. So what's next? That's kind of where we're going with this now. I think we've felt like we've sort of spent a lot of time reacting and responding to things that are happening, trying to work out what the next steps are. But I think now we're actually getting to a point where I definitely am, where I'm kind of moving past that and going, right, what does this really mean for us now and into the future? So as I said, the perspective that we've been talking about from a leadership team internally has been around, let's use this as a really unique opportunity to try and do things differently. Like, let's use it to try and experiment with something that's different, look at each of our service areas, see what activities can be done differently, changed, suit with the community now, but it may help us to inform something in terms of a more future prolonged version of service delivery. We may find efficiencies doing it one way now, so why not replicate those into the future? So this is the way we kind of are now looking at it going, let's actually make the most of what is otherwise a pretty average situation. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, I've been speaking to Cheyenne and Mike about this in terms of, we have a BCP in place, so our business continuity plan, which really triggers when we actually have short-term outages. So the last time we probably used it was around the statewide blackout, where everything literally went out for, hours. So what we're planning at the moment is around, we're kind of in a good environment to sort of test that right now. So while we're kind of all in this state of flux, we may just kind of test what that might look like and what it really means for us if we actually go into a stoppage right now. And albeit it wouldn't be necessarily a prolonged stoppage, but again, this is coming from that same opportunistic thinking. Like while we're in this environment, let's do what we can to kind of make sure that we're really set up and secure for the future. And in the next sort of midterm, we're talking sort of in the next couple of months, and leading hopefully right through to the end of this COVID environment. We've started to think about as well, what does post-COVID look like for our community? What are we thinking our services are going to look like? Are some services going to be required? Are some services going to be replaced? Are some going to be just changing the look and feel of what they actually do, some of those activities? And also, feeding around, how can we continue to provide that quality assurance to our community around the services that we're providing? So we don't know really what the environment's going to look like after this. So we don't know how people are going to interact and whether we just kind of go back 6 months in time. I think that might be hard. So, we're starting to think about that and plan that out as well. So that's kind of the end of what I was going to say around COVID. So I'm happy to open it up for any questions if you like.
Are there any questions? Councillor Gossing.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep, off you go. Yes, yep.
Grace, I just have a question. I can't see you, but I can hear you. Look, in relation to the welfare checks, you said that you've been asked to work with the patrons of the Grenville Centre. If we are aware of members in the community, elderly members, that we are concerned about with their isolation, is there a way that we can somehow engage members of the council staff to be able to do welfare checks on other citizens if they want that support? Or do they have to be members of the Grenville Centre?
Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. No, they don't. They have to just be anyone that we have registered on our community database. It doesn't necessarily have to be Grenville patrons. That's probably a significant section of them, but anyone that we hold details for, we can get in contact with them and can be performing those welfare checks. So that's something that is now part of our changed or adjusted sort of service delivery out of the community services area. The welfare checks that have been asked for us to do with regards to the SAPOL side of things is being more around those positive cases, people where we're being given that information. Okay.
I do apologise to the Mayor not saying through the chair as well. Sorry about that, Mayor. So sorry. Also, Grace, just in relation to that, can we lodge through a customer service request, perhaps a citizen that we may want to be part of that process?
As in someone
welfare checks.
Yeah, so someone you'd like us to welfare check on.
Yeah, yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, I'll put my hand down now. Oh.
Yeah, your hand's down, but you're waving manually. Yep, good. Councillor Norris, did you have your line on? No? After? Yep, no worries. Councillor Small-Smith.
Yes, I just have a question in relation to the cost to this council of us using council staff to assist police in this kind of thing. I'm a little bit concerned because I know that there's been some issues with police being abused and what have you, and I wouldn't like to see any of our staff get abused because they're just reporting or checking on someone. So I am concerned that they're using our staff, but I would like to know what the extra cost is going to be to this council.
Thanks, Councillor, through the chair. There's no extra cost. This has now become as a part of the new service delivery of our more so on the health and regs sort of side of our area. This is what part of their role is now going to take up. So we're doing this within existing staff resources to be able to do that as well. And the observe and report function means that they don't need to interact with anyone. So they don't need to get out of the car. Like they could just drive past the park and go, there's more than 10 people there. I'm going to observe that and report that directly to SAPOL, and then SAPOL will go out and investigate. They don't need to intervene at all. So that's, a part of what that function is. But yeah, we are taking on some of these tasks and responsibilities. We are changing our services more broadly. And so where there's some services that are dropping away, where we're not, sort of serving meals and things like that, we're redirecting those stuff. So this is not costing us anything extra to do this work.
Are there any other questions from councillors? No? All right, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. We move on to item 5, confidential matter, Health Precinct ACH development update on page 116. Somebody wish to move that way? Moved by Councillor Halls. Councillor Halls, do you wish to speak to the motion? No. Does it find a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Onuzans. Do you wish to speak to the motion? Okay. Does any other councillor wish to speak, make comment or question? Just make sure the doors stay open. We haven't moved the motion yet. Thank you to the governance officer. I love your enthusiasm, but we must keep the doors open until we've actually approved the motion. If there's any other councillor wishing to comment, question, motion? If not, then I'll put that. Those in favour, those against, I declare that carried. So we've opened the doors just for the recording, which will go on the internet. We've concluded the item 5.1. There's no other items on the agenda. It's item 6, which is closure, and I'll close the meeting at 10 minutes past 8. And I remind members we have a closed informal gathering as well.